All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to BioAlberta's Boosting Biotech Mentorship Series. My name is Rob Stoddard, and I'm the president and CEO of BioAlberta. Boosting Biotech is a collaboration between BioAlberta, Innovative Medicines Canada and its member companies, and the Government of Alberta. The initiative helps bridge the skills and talent gap that can exist between recent post-secondary graduates and life sciences companies by providing experiential learning opportunities for students at Alberta SMEs. The program helps students gain critical work experience while supporting SMEs to hire needed resources. Including the upcoming intake of interns set to begin on May 1st, I'm proud to say that Boosting Biotech has provided over 70 opportunities for internships during the two-year program. Boosting Biotech also offers mentoring for multinational life science companies to Alberta students and SMEs. We've worked with life science leaders, SMEs, and students to come up with topics of interest to our ecosystem and offer virtual speakers and seminars on those topics. Hopefully, before the end of 2021, we will be able to bring experts and Albertans together physically. I know the entire industry has been working on that, and we applaud and cheer on their success and their progress and every step. Before I introduce today's topic, I just want to give you an overview of the agenda. We're going to have about a 15-minute presentation by Abbvie and Tracy Ramsey. Following that, we're going to have a panel discussion. Tracy's going to moderate it, and we're going to bring out Niels Emmerich from Abbvie and Dr. Michael Weichert from Passlix. After that, there'll be a time for questions and answers from the floor. During that Q&A period, what we're asking you to do is put those questions into the chat. And when asked, you can unmute and ask the question to the panel or an individual of your choice in your own words. And if we don't get your question by the end of the session at 2 o'clock, please put your questions in the chat and we will work together to get you answers after that. So for today's show, I am pleased to introduce our subject matter expert, Abbvie Canada. Abbvie Canada ranks second amongst research-based pharmaceutical companies and is the fastest growing among the top 10 companies. Abbvie Canada has also consistently ranked in the top 50 great places to work in Canada. Our topic for today is taking academic drug discoveries to the clinic, what's missing? And leading today's discussion is Tracy Ramsey, Vice President and General Manager, Abbvie Canada. Tracy was appointed Vice President and General Manager of Abbvie Canada just this past January 21. Previously, Tracy held the roles of Vice President and Country Manager for Canada for Allergan Inc., an Abbvie company, and most recently held the position of Allergan Specialty Portfolio Country Manager since joining Abbvie in May of 2020. She has held leadership positions with pharmaceutical companies in Canada, US, and Europe, and we're so fortunate to have her with us today, not only as a keynote presenter, but also as the moderator of our panel discussion following her presentation. Tracy holds an MBA from Dalhousie University in Halifax and an Honors Bachelor of Science from Queen's University in Kingston. With that, I'm pleased to turn you over and turn the Boosting Biotech virtual stage over to Tracy Ramsey. Tracy, all yours.
Great, thanks, Rob, and such a pleasure to be here with everyone today and our panelists, Niels and Michael. And so what I'd love to do is just say it's an honor to be here representing Abbvie Canada, and thought for those of you who are less familiar with Abbvie, I'd just give you a quick introduction from a global and a local perspective. So really, Abbvie, we're an innovative biopharmaceutical company, as mentioned by Rob. We are currently ranked 4th globally, 2nd here in Canada. And really our focus is really to bring innovative new medicines to meet the unmet needs of people around the world. If you go to the next slide, please, Eileen. What you can see is that as Abbvie, we have a very rich history. In fact, over 130 years of history being in the pharmaceutical space with origins with a company called Abbott, which you may be familiar with. And Abbvie was actually launched out of Abbott in 2013, and as an organization, we now stand about 47,000 employees globally. We have just about 1,000 here in Canada, and in terms of our portfolio and impact on Canadians, we touch about 1 million patient lives annually here. If you go to the next slide, one of the things that really is a driver please go ahead and build it off, thanks. A driver in terms of as an innovative organization is really having manufacturing and R&D facilities. You might have heard in May 2020 that Abbvie acquired a company called Allergan. And when you look at our combined footprint around the world, you can see it's almost doubles the geographic footprint in the context of those facilities. So we're very proud in terms of our research and in manufacturing capabilities. When you go to the next slide, please. Why we're most proud is really looking at our R&D capacity. And I think that's very consistent with the topic here today. We actually have about 9,000 employees that work in R&D around the world. And when you look at the particular, I'm going to say, profile, 1 in 8 of those employees actually have a doctorate degree within the organization. When you look at investment into the R&D, in 2018, we invested $5.1 billion globally. And in fact, in 2020, we invested $6.6 billion. And we believe it's a really important part of our success in bringing new innovations is making sure we're looking across the research portfolio. When you look in Canada, in terms of what does that mean, we actually have about 100 active clinical trials in Canada currently, and touching over 3,000 Canadians. So a very large and committed footprint. If you go to the next slide, please. When you look at then how are we focused from a therapeutic area, what you can see is that we touch almost 60 conditions in terms of therapeutic options, and that really spans, as you can see here, key areas. So with the acquisition of Allergan, we actually have a medical aesthetics global organization that has products that are both devices as well as therapeutics. In the therapeutic area, you can see we span from immunology, oncology, neuroscience, all the way through to women's health. And when you look from a brand perspective, we actually represent over 30 brands in 175 countries. If you go to the next slide, I thought I'd just share with you really briefly some of the brands that you might be familiar with when you look at deeper in terms of our portfolio. Under the immunology, products like Humira that have a vast number of indications in terms of indications like rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, as well as newer immunology products like Skyrizi and Rinvoq, which have been recently brought to Canada. And then when you go across to the neuroscience or the oncology areas, you can see we've got a product here in Canada called Venclexta, which is currently indicated for CLL, as well as an approval of an AML indication. So a commitment to oncology. As another example, when you go to neuroscience, you can see that we've got a portfolio of products in the migraine space with a platform of Botox, but also newer products that we're looking to bring to Canada, such as Ubrelvy. We also work in Parkinson's disease, with the example being Duodopa, as well as we have an extensive glaucoma portfolio in eye care. In virology, you might be familiar with Mavorite for HCV. And in our portfolio, we also, you can see, have products for women's health when we think about fibroids or oral contraceptives. So a very broad portfolio that we're extremely proud of. And when you go to the next slide, one of the things that Abbvie prides itself is really being advancing medicine. And in our efforts to advance medicine, we believe we can reshape and bring better quality of life, better outcomes to patients. And so as a result of that focus and effort, you can see from a therapeutic area in terms of standard of care, we have leading positions across many of the therapeutic areas that I mentioned. And we're extremely proud of that and continue to invest in these areas, which is part of why we're excited to speak to you all today. And if you go to the next slide, please, Eileen. really it's our focus is really making an incredible impact on patients' lives. And so what we believe is we need to innovate in the context of our portfolio, in the context of our science, and in the context of how we bring these innovative products to countries like Canada. And so we're very proud of that and look forward to the discussion today. So with that, I think what I'd like to do is maybe we can close down the slides. Thanks, Eileen. And I'd like to do a more formal introduction of our panelists today. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Niels Emmerich. For those of you who haven't had a chance to meet Niels, he comes to us as the Vice President and the Global Head of Search and Evaluation at Abbvie. And as I mentioned, being an innovative, science-driven organization, this is a very important role for the organization. He has a team of individuals that are responsible for identifying and assessing partnership and investment opportunities for Abbvie on a global basis. His team is responsible for a plethora of recent, I'm going to say, partnerships and deals. And they include partnerships with companies such as Caribou, IMAB, Genmab, Immune Sciences, just to name a few. And we'll hear more about that through the course of this session. Prior to joining corporate strategy offices in terms of search and evaluation, Niels had several positions within Abbvie and prior Abbott, as well as before joining the organization, worked with a company called BioAlberta and Immatics, for which he was a co-founder of that organization. He also previously worked with McKinsey & Company. So you can see a great expert in this area, and we look forward to the discussion. I'd also like to take the opportunity to welcome and introduce our second panelist, which is Dr. Michael Weikert. Dr. Weikert has been developing drugs and startup companies in the biotech and pharmaceutical pharmaceutical industry for over 29 years, and he is currently the CEO of Pasalex Pharmaceuticals. He also he's not just focused on that, but also the COO of Greenfire Bio and the executive chairman of Chelation Partners. In addition to his current roles, he's got an extensive background as a CEO in a number of companies, including, just to name a few, Illumi Sonics, Sonosense, and C Medical Systems. Within those experiences and deep knowledge, he's had the opportunity to work on oncology product development, including phase 3 and NDA within the T-cell lymphoma area, as well as business planning for drug development in the area of cancer drugs, which you may be familiar with, such as leuprolide, paclitaxel, and irinotecan, which are standards of care in the oncology space. He also has been successful in terms of the regulatory landscape, having successfully obtained orphan drug status and fast track designations for oncology-related products, both in the US as well as the EU. And also to speak about startup, we would be remiss not to mention that he's also been successful in his raising capital in the context of those efforts. And prior to the joining pharmaceutical industry, he was at the National Cancer Institute, at the National Institute of Health, and he has a PhD in genetics from the University of Wisconsin. So very thrilled to have two experts with us today. And so what I'd like to do is maybe just start out the discussion with some questions. And as mentioned, as we go through, please feel free to put your questions into the chat, and we're happy together. So perhaps, Niels, I could start with you.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for the welcome, Tracy.
No, pleasure. Thank you for being here today. So I touched a little bit on Abbvie's therapeutic portfolio in terms of the breadth and the depth. So perhaps you could speak a little bit to the focus that you have for you and your team, and perhaps speak a little bit about how a typical flow deal might work when you're acquiring assets or partnering with organizations each year.
Yes, I'm happy to do that. So you mentioned the therapeutic areas that Abbvie is currently serving. I'd like to emphasize that at Abbvie, the R&D strategy and the business development strategies are very tightly aligned. We do not do deals or make venture capital investments in therapeutic areas that we not have any expertise in. And so what you already said in the introduction matters. The areas of immunology and inflammation, autoimmune diseases, oncology, neurosciences broadly speaking, including psychiatry as well as migraine, and eye care are really the four pillars for Abbvie from an R&D as well as from a business development and venture capital investing point of view. In addition to that, aesthetics, which you also mentioned, which is not a therapeutic area, but a really customer-serving business area for the company. And Legacy Allergan, now part of Abbvie, is a leading company globally in that area, plays an integral part in our overall strategy. So those are the five areas where we would be looking more than in any other area like virology or women's health to further expand what we are already doing today. And so if you drill a little bit deeper, in immunology, we're probably best known for products that we've marketed for many years for disease areas like gastrointestinal disorders, like take for instance Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, dermatology with diseases like psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, hidradenitis suppurativa, rheumatology, probably best known for that. But we're increasingly venturing into new space in immunology and inflammation. We are increasingly interested in inflammation-driven fibrotic diseases like systemic scleroderma or idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, as well as interferonopathies like, for instance, systemic lupus. In oncology, we have an especially strong presence since we started to build out a commercial presence in oncology in hematological malignancies, thanks to the marketed products that Tracy mentioned. But we're looking to further expand and really reinforce our strong position in hematological malignancies, but at the same time, continue to invest heavily into partnerships that could also give us anchor assets for establishing a similarly strong presence in solid tumors. Neurosciences is really a basket from our point of view for multiple diseases that are not necessarily related. Psychiatry, where we have products on the market, migraine, same situation, products on the market already. But then there are neurodegenerative diseases. And this is an area where really many in the industry have tried and failed: Parkinson's, Alzheimer's in particular, other types, less common types of dementia, neuromotor diseases like ALS. And so we are heavily investing, especially into early alliances, into disruptive technologies in the hope that those in our hands, together with our partners, can ultimately make a difference for patients and caregivers. And then eye care, also an area where there are fewer companies compared to, for instance, oncology, with products on the market. It's a little bit more focused on a smaller group of global top 20 companies. But it's definitely an area for us to further invest into and further build out, both back of the eye as well as front of the eye diseases. We're really taking a broad approach there as well. And then aesthetics is a very broad area. We're probably best known for products that are toxin-based or fillers, but our engagement in that area also from an R&D perspective goes beyond that. For instance, we recently entered into new collaborations also in the area of hair loss. So it's a further expanding area And that is the fifth pillar of what we do with respect to the main areas that support the business of Abbvie, and that we expect to continue to support what we do going forward from a growth point of view. Now, Tracy, back to your question regarding really deal flow. So we see roughly, and when I say we, I mean a team of 20 experts, all of whom are PhDs, MD PhDs with significant academic and industry experience. We see about 1,800 individual partnering opportunities over the course of the year across therapeutic areas. And we end up doing deals for about 1%. So unfortunately, 99 out of 100 partnering opportunities that we take an initial look at do not make it all the way to the finish line to an executed deal and a new alliance. So we do about 15 plus minus 3 deals per year, roughly split between 1/3 new venture investments, so about 6, and 2/3 business development transactions. And those business development transactions are predominantly for early stage assets. As much as we like validated, more mature clinical stage assets, the reality is that you have to engage early on. We're not afraid to do that. And many of our alliances really start at discovery stage or with a preclinical lead candidate or the first phase of clinical exploration. So I'll pause there. Back to you, Tracy.
Thank you, very clear. And you can see the diversity of the portfolio, and perhaps we've got a question from Patrick, which I think is right in line. So Patrick, if you're okay to unmute, perhaps you could ask Niels your question.
Hi, Niels. Yeah, thank you. It's been wonderful to hear some of the exciting developments and things that you're interested in doing. So my question is, do you have any interest, just thinking about neuroscience and immunology, I suppose, combining the two in terms of neuropathic pain and its link to cytokines?
Yeah, so we are interested in the concept of neuroinflammation and have done deals in that area, for instance, with Elector. We've exited the area of pain, which is an area that Abbott historically was in, and as a legacy Abbott company, Abbvie continued to pursue for some time. But we made a conscious decision to, at this point in time, no longer pursue pain. So I'm afraid the answer is that there would be limited interest in that.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Patrick. So perhaps one more question for Niels, and then I'll go to Michael. So just to the early stage. So you spoke about 1% coming through as a deal. So love to hear a little bit about any early stage opportunities that you actually have identified and closed that you can speak about in the last 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, happy to do that. So if you look at recent Abbvie press releases, announcements regarding new deals, you will see, for instance, in the neurosciences area, a deal that we announced with Mitokinin for PINK1A agonists. PINK1A is a protein that is involved in mitochondrial health, and we think that's a very attractive target. Especially in conjunction with the assets being developed by Mitokinin. Another deal that we announced recently, which really starts from scratch with 2 R&D teams putting their heads together and thinking about an R&D work plan and experiments that we want to jointly bring forward, is with Caribou in the area of allogeneic cell therapies. So Caribou is Nobel laureate Jennifer Doudna's company. And so we're very excited about that alliance as well. Then in December last year, we announced a deal with Frontier Medicines, an MPM-backed company that is an expert really when it comes to thinking about new chemical matter for targeted degradation of proteins and molecular glues. So another alliance that really tries to go after hard to drug targets, presently undruggable proteins, and devise new strategies to create tractable chemical matter against those targets. So those are three examples that are very early. Two really starting in discovery, one in early preclinical, and then other deals that are more on the early clinical side that we entered into recently is with IMAP Biopharma from Shanghai. That was in phase 1 dose escalation at the point in time when we did the deal. It is what we believe to be a best-in-class anti-CD47 antibody, which should add significantly to the assets that we have, in particular for hematological malignancies. And similarly on the small molecule side with another Chinese company, Jaco Bio, also from Shanghai, for SHP2. Phosphatases have historically been difficult to drug selectively and potently. There's very interesting biology around SHP2 and the regulation of immune responses, as well as oncogenic driver-mediated signaling intrinsic to cancer cells. And very excited to do that deal as well for 2 inhibitors, both of which were in the first phase of clinical testing. So these are 2 examples, 2 recent examples for early clinical stage deals. I'll pause there.
Super, thank you. No, I think it gives for our listeners and participants just an idea, right, of the early stage assets. And so maybe I can do a shift going to Michael. So hearing about, early stage, either preclinical discovery, as a bio entrepreneur, love to hear a little bit about what you face when presenting to a larger pharmaceutical company, perhaps someone like Niels and his team. What are the things to think about? What's your best advice and insights?
Well, thanks, and for the question and also the intro earlier. It's obviously a very different story to present to a pharma company than to an investor to some degree, but there's also some parallels. So investors always want to know about the team first and foremost, and the science and the business case. Pharma, they kind of know the business. If they're going to participate in a meaningful way, they're going to have the team. They really want to know your science, your mechanism, and your human data, if you have any, which for pharma is they always want to see the next card. So they want to see your GLP tox data if you don't have it yet. They want to see your regulatory feedback or approval if you don't have that for your first in human study. They want to see the phase 1 safety data if you don't have that yet. And if you have that, they want to see some evidence of efficacy in the clinic. So there's always a next step. One of the biggest challenges is telling a story about where you are now and why where you are now is compelling. And it's beyond just your science. It's also about how does this fit in the competitive landscape? How does this fit in the payer reimbursement landscape for the US market, which is, the most complicated and largest market? And often, if you don't have a story about where this fits, your pharma partner may know a lot about it, but you really need to know something about it and where this is going to fit into both the competitive landscape and the reimbursement market. Sometimes it is really important to be able to help the pharma company see where it fits into where you think it fits into their business. Rather than just saying, I got this cool technology, do you want it? You have to tell a story about why this partnership makes sense for both parties and why this time makes sense for both parties. And if you haven't thought that through and you're just focused on your technology and your product and how cool it is and what a great platform it is or whatever, you can often overlook the most important part of your case or your sale. And that is explaining how this business relationship, which is really what you're talking about, makes sense and makes sense to do now. Obviously, you do have to cover your technology. Entrepreneurs tend to talk about what they're comfortable with. They talk about the things that they have birthed as their proud children. But the problem is the story that you need to tell is not just, look how cool my technology and product is. It's a story about how does this help patients? How does this change care? How does this create a business opportunity? How does this business opportunity fit with the business that the partner you're talking to is in? And that bigger scope of conversation and of presentation is often overlooked by entrepreneurs who are focused on the things that they're comfortable with and the things that they know best. With respect to, you know, how to pull your story together, I mean, it's really important to have a compelling story. Whatever your story is, whether it's a technology story, a device story, pharmaceutical story, a biotech, biopharmaceutical story, having a compelling story that goes through the elements of the problem, the unique solution, how that solution is differentiated from other solutions in the market, and what opportunity that genuinely creates. Many of the things that you've seen in presentations that don't go well are things like being very general about the market. There's 1 million people that have this disease. Okay, therefore the market's huge. You know, you need to be very specific about how your approach targets solving a specific problem with those patients, what that really looks like in terms of the landscape of other solutions that are available to those patients now and in the near future. Things like focusing on the science at a level of detail initially that blots out everything else. You talk about for an hour about the science and nothing else. The science is something that you get into with time. This is always a process. It's never a single conversation. You should view the first conversation as it has to be exciting enough and it has to be interesting enough that you can get in the door for the follow-up conversations. If you try to stuff everything into that first conversation so that all the questions are answered, then you've probably failed, because you can never answer all the questions in one presentation, and you've obviously overlooked a bunch of the important parts of putting this in the right context and helping the party you're talking to understand why this is something they want to learn more about. If you think about each step in this process is, I need to tell them why they want to learn more, why this is exciting enough to want to invest more time and energy. I mean, the 20 people that Niels has looking at 1,800 deals a year, I mean, the deals that they actually do, they've invested an enormous amount of time and energy. And that investment is only going to be made on those things that pass the earlier thresholds of, this is exciting, this we want to know more about, this fits our business. So as much as you can do that homework up front for them, the better your opportunity for advancing in that process. And thinking about it as a process also takes some of the weight off of trying to cover everything in all the detail up front, which is a weight that you will, never be able to bear on the initial contact. And then the last thing is, sometimes it's really important, or it's really challenging to find the right person to introduce it to. All the people I'm sure in Niels' organization have different specialties, different strengths, different areas that they are really aware of and understand and recognize what fits and what doesn't fit. Getting something to the right person is helpful. It's not essential in a well-run organization, but it's helpful so that they can quickly assess whether or not this is the right thing. Sometimes a quick no is as good as anything other than a yes, because a quick no means they invest less time and you invest less time in pursuing something that's not a match. But getting it to the right person to get that quick assessment of whether this is something to proceed with or something to bail on and move on from is very helpful. So anyway, that's a lot of rambling advice. So I'll let the questions and follow-up focus me on what's helpful.
So Michael, I took lots of notes, and I think when I think about how much we spend our time about unmet medical need, right, and true value for patients, right, value for payers, value for patients, I think your advice is very fitting, at least from the conversations we have every day. And so maybe to complement that I could turn back to Niels just to maybe take that as a follow-on question. So when you think about the criteria, so if we go from story and science, maybe on the science side, Niels, is there something specific that you're looking at in terms of early stage assets as a key criteria or key data points that would help you get to that quick yes or that quick no, to Michael's point?
Yeah, I wish there was a general and clear answer to that question. It's a great question, but what we are looking for is really stage appropriate evidence, which means that if you talk about a discovery stage or early preclinical asset, we want to see that you properly validated the target. I was taught that the strength of my convictions and beliefs is a poor surrogate for high quality data, and that continues to be true. So if you discover a novel target and potentially biological or chemical matter against it, we expect you to do the killer experiments, such as to knock down or knock out the target and see a shift in potency in cellular potency assays. We expect you to use standard cell lines that have been used by others so that we can compare across experiments, our own experiments as well as third-party experiments. It doesn't help you or doesn't help us. If you use an exotic cell line, it's the only cell line, and we already know that it sits on a hair trigger with respect to entering into apoptosis if you only give that cell line a sideways look, right? So to think through how to falsify your hypothesis and keep doing that until there's no place left where you can poke a hole into your scientific hypothesis is of crucial importance. And then when it comes to preclinical stage, later preclinical stage assets that are about to enter IND enabling studies or have already done that, there's really a list of standard things that should be done with respect to, for instance, if you talk about biologics, antibodies, optimizing expression in typical expression systems like CHO cell lines. It doesn't really help if you go to, say, plant-based or algae-based expression with your first antibody and try to introduce multiple variables into the interpretation of your preclinical data. And so for those who are interested in that, especially academic institutions, we have very detailed presentations that really talk about what are the expectations at all the different stages throughout the drug discovery and development continuum. And many of those may sound boring, like doing a kinome scan and assessing hERG liabilities, CYP interactions, et cetera, But that is important once you think no longer about basic research in an academic environment, but about pharmaceutical drug development that has to adhere to certain principles. So we're happy to talk about details. Those were just a few examples. And it generally helps if you bring someone on board, if you start a new company who's done this before, who has experience with drug development at the stages that you plan to go through with your molecule and your company.
That's great. And in fact, I see Patrick had a second part to his question, so this might be a good part to ask Patrick back in, just a question about screening.
All right, thank you. Thanks again. Yeah, on that front, I'm just curious, and I've been curious about this for quite some time, but just looking, when we think about therapeutics in humans, for humans, how much value do you place in assays that are done in human tissue or stem cells? Just wanted some feedback there.
Yeah, no, that is increasingly important, and Abbvie is one of the organizations that tries to substitute animal experiments wherever possible for cell-based assays, ideally using human cells. That's one dimension. And there's really a lot depends on the therapeutic area, the target, the pathway, the mechanism of action that you're asking us to take a look at. But one of the expectations at an early stage is that you've built a robust reporter assay that allows us to understand and interrogate the target and the pathway, ideally in human cells.
Excellent, thank you.
Thanks again for the question, Patrick. And if others have questions, please, you can pop them right into the chat, and we'll look to fit them in. Perhaps then we could go back to the, for Michael, the entrepreneurial side, right? We spoke about raising capital. Love your comments around challenges being an entrepreneur in the Alberta region specifically, and how can pharma, big pharma, or biopharma help facilitate biotechs in Western Canada as a specific example?
Well, I think we all know it's a challenge in Alberta to develop pharmaceuticals. The biggest challenge that I find, and the company Paslex found, is finding the experience and talent that's really sufficient to take your drug into clinical development. So that transition is a really important one, and it's one that exceeds academic expertise. And as Niels said, it's really useful to have somebody on your team who's done it before. And there's not a lot of people in Alberta and Western Canada, other than maybe Vancouver, that have that kind of experience across the plethora of skills that you need to engage. You need to have people with regulatory experience, quality experience, supply chain, clinical, toxicology, medical writing. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's generally not co-located anywhere in Alberta. So it forces companies to be virtual companies if they're really going to advance to a clinical stage of projects. And if you've just got an academic project, you're in discovery and you're going to partner it, then you can perhaps get away with sort of an academic team. But once you get beyond that stage and you're doing toxicology and preclinical work that Niels was describing, or you get into the clinic, you need a team of people who've done it before. And unfortunately, that means becoming a virtual company and finding talent wherever you can find it, whether it's in Toronto, whether it's in San Francisco, whether it's in Boston, whether it's in India, for that matter, wherever the talent that fills the needs you have, you can find, then you need to be virtual and engage it. I happen to be based in San Francisco. So I was recruited by Paslex for exactly this need. They needed a CEO that could come in who had done it before, who understood how to develop drugs and had done that before, and could basically shepherd this product to the clinical stage. And, I can report that we just got our Health Canada authorization in March, and we're planning to start our first in human dosing in May. And it's been a long journey to get there. But that was very helpful for the company to reach out outside of Alberta and say, we just need somebody who knows how to do this, that can really drive the drug development forward. So, that's, one of the biggest, that is the biggest challenge, I think. Finding capital is the second biggest challenge. So the capital for the very early work is readily available. You can get $50,000, $100,000, $250,000 grants for lots of early stage stuff. When you get to doing IND enabling or CTA enabling toxicology, when you get to, you're going to start a clinical study, when you get to manufacturing GMP material for development, that's really hard to come by that money. And that's where you're typically reaching out to investors. And frankly, Alberta investors are great for natural resources, and not so hot for biotech. There's just not a big investment community for biotech. And I have to say, being part of the Merck experiment in sort of being a JLabs-like thing in Edmonton did not go well. There was no sustained commitment. We were one of the first 4 companies brought in the first class for that accelerator that they put together in Edmonton, and nothing really ever came of that. So the accelerator model, or the incubator model of JLabs, is one that I think has gotten quite interesting. And of course, JLabs has proliferated all over the place. But it takes a sustained commitment. It can't just be we're going to throw something up there and see how it goes. how can Big Pharma help? I don't know. They can continue to scout in places like Edmonton and Calgary, places that others overlook. I was at a bio conference 3 or 4 years ago where they had a meeting about, finding the real gems in pharma, the next sort of groundbreaking things in pharma. And I thought it was going to be about discovering these diamonds in the rough that exist in places like, Alberta and other places that are outside the mainstream and the marquee institutions. And instead, it was a pharma and venture capital panel about, we're going to do things in our own labs and we're going to look where we normally look. And I stood up and said, hey, there's lots of really exciting stuff that you're not seeing, that you're overlooking. And the answer was essentially, well, it'll come around again, and we'll see it when it, it's the old keys under the streetlight. We'll see it when it comes under our streetlight next. So, that's what pharma can really do to help, is to actually be, doing what we're describing here today, is prospecting where others are ignoring it. Because a lot of times the ecosystem of thought leadership and status quo reinforces and creates a confirmation bias around how to solve problems. Whereas people in places that are outside that mainstream, they have a lot more freedom to think about problems and solutions than the people in the mainstream. And that freedom allows them to come up with some really unique stuff. And that unique stuff is what can really make a difference and, create the next sort of groundbreaking opportunity for, pharma to develop.
It's great.
Yeah, if I can chime in here. So I would add to what Michael just said, that the scope of our organization, the Search and Evaluation Organization at Abbvie, is global. We're on a 365 days a year global Easter egg hunt, and we have no preconceived notions with respect to where high quality science comes from. And it does certainly help if you have big brand names like Bob Langer attached to your new company creation, but we really look at the scientific merit of each individual opportunity, regardless of where it comes from. However, it needs to be said that partnering opportunities that we get to see from places that are not that well connected into the San Francisco or Boston ecosystems, or the greater London area in Europe, or others in Switzerland, Germany, elsewhere, or more recently, especially in Shanghai in China, that it happens more often that some of the key data that we would normally expect for a molecule at a certain stage is not there. And that is typically because you don't have the seasoned industry expert make sure that you check all the boxes that really put your company and asset front and center with respect to pharma partnering. But we're agnostic with respect to territories. And one of the ways to really get that expertise, and there was a recent Nature Reviews Drug Discovery article about this, which was really illuminating, is to consider to bring a corporate strategic venture investor into your seed round or Series A round. If you look at that article, you will see that those companies that bring or make a connection with pharma via having a corporate strategic venture capital investor as part of a larger consortium usually attract much higher valuations and have better exits. And so that is one way to tap into pharma expertise without necessarily handing over your baby and signing an exclusive license agreement or an agreement for a build to buy or a structured acquisition or anything like that.
It's great insights. And it also speaks to, from an expertise perspective, some of you might have seen there's an open letter in the Global Mail today, signed actually by BioAlberta with Rob's signature, just talking about how to do a better job in terms of partnership at a federal and provincial basis for our life sciences industry. So I think it speaks to, again, creating that network to be able to tap into the expertise, be it government or private. And maybe this will be a little too specific, but now I'll give it a go. So thinking about, as you said, that the right studies, right? Doing those studies that are really going to make a difference early on. So if you were giving your best advice to someone in an academic institution, they've got a very robust target validation database. Is there something that you would direct them towards in terms of certain experiments that you would like them to complete, or does it vary and they should be getting expertise in terms of it's more unique to that particular asset?
Yeah, it really depends on the therapeutic modality that you choose. Are you going after a surface standing target that belongs to a well-characterized family that you can tackle with an antibody? Then the questions would be more about what's the epitope, how is it different from other epitopes and other antibodies, what makes it unique. Then to which extent have you de-immunized and optimized your antibody? Have you looked at FC competent versus FC silent? What difference does that make? And so that takes you down one particular path, and there's going to be a set of specific questions arising from the choice of target and the modality that you're picking to go after that target. If you're on the small molecule side, then the questions would be different, right? Do you have a co-crystal? Do you have other structural data informed by NMR experiments, for instance? Do you have a good understanding of structure-activity relationship and how you can drive that towards greater selectivity and greater potency? Are there multiple binding sites, active site versus allosteric sites? Does that make a difference? Do you really have good biochemical as well as cellular potency? Do you have reporter assays? Can you identify a PK/PD relation, pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic relationship? And so it becomes very specific. If you go into immune-based mechanisms such as cell-based therapies or bispecific T-cell engagers, which is an area that we invested heavily into in recent years with partnerships with Dragonfly, Harpoon, Teneo Bio, Genmab, Scripps. So an area that we're very interested in, but it once again changes the paradigm how your molecule works, and now you need to look at a whole slew of really parameters with respect to how you're engaging immune effector cells, how you want to measure that. So it really becomes very specific very quickly.
Thank you. And so we've got Sami has put something in here. Can I turn it over to you in terms of your question?
Yes, great. Thank you so much. I'm enjoying this conversation. My comment is regarding really reaching out to pharma at an early stage in the drug discovery. Typically, when making a target product profile for a product or a service at the end of the day, one doesn't really have a lot of guidance, especially in the early stages. What really is interesting? What is pharma looking for in terms of data? So we found that really reaching out to pharma at this very early stage and really having a conversation, if possible, with their scientists to say, look, this is our target disease. This is what our compound might look like at the end of the day. What is it that would really make you take a second look and be interested in this? And then this way, when we look at designing our TPP, we took all of these studies into account and actually designed our studies to achieve those goals. So when we reach the pharma eventually, this is what they were looking for. So I'm just wondering what the panel thinks of that approach, if that's something that you'd find useful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand the question. And we get that question quite often. But unfortunately, given how many people we have and how many assets we look at over the course of the year, we would not be in a position to give free advice to 1,800 individual companies and their assets over the course of the year, as much as we would like to do that and as much as we enjoy the scientific dialogue. But that is just not something we can operationalize. So I think really the path to tapping into pharma expertise is through considering to have a strategic venture investor as part of your board and your syndicate, or to have seasoned advisors that can fill that role, and then to have one-on-one partnering meetings as part of Bio, JP Morgan, and many of the other smaller events. We as Abbvie are typically at conferences like virtual AACR happening right now. We'll be at ASCO, we'll be at many other conferences across the therapeutic areas that we serve. And we participate in those events with the purpose in mind to meet people like you and have an introductory conversation. So that the relationship aspect really can also be built, which is what Michael was commenting on earlier. You're right, you typically don't get from first conversation to a deal in 6 months. In many cases, it takes years to build a relationship. And once there's a relationship and trust and understanding of your scientific expertise, then 2, 3, 4 years down the road is the point in time when actually the rubber hits the road and we have a serious conversation about teaming up. With respect to target product profiles, it is absolutely the right question to think about, because you're looking at a growing number of diseases where if you think about the end game, which would be what would you have to prove in a pivotal study for approval in major markets, it becomes increasingly difficult to really justify the investment in places like CLL, first or second line multiple myeloma, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, and many others, because of how recently approved drugs have been able to move the needle for patients and physicians. And so if you think through that, what would you have to demonstrate? What would both be have a chance to be well-powered to lead to a statistically significant result that would not just prove a marginal improvement with statistical significance, but would also deliver something that would be clinically meaningful? Those are the products that we're looking for. And so back to Tracy's point, we're increasingly focusing on areas where unmet medical need remains high. That is why we're not only focusing on rheumatoid arthritis in immunology, but why we're increasingly looking at hard to treat diseases like Sjogren's, lupus, systemic sclerosis, IPF, places where others have failed and where unmet medical need remains high.
Let me give you another example of how you can get support for things like a TPP. So I'm a Spark mentor. Spark is a part of it's a mentoring group for the medical school at Stanford. And they're franchising their model out to a lot of different places. And I believe the co-founder of Spark just presented in Edmonton, for example, in the last week. So what Spark does is they choose a dozen or so products a year, give them a small amount of money, but they basically give them access to 160 industry experts, many of whom are retired and have worked in the field for decades. And they have them initiate their project with a target product profile that they have to put together following a format that is very clearly oriented towards what would you need to determine in order for this to become a pharmaceutical or biopharmaceutical or a device that would be used in medicine, and then get feedback right away from these advisors and mentors. And then they present on a periodic basis throughout the year to show their progress, to get additional feedback, to ask specific questions that they are struggling with. And then, you know, if they get to the point of having a spin-out company or being ready for a transaction, then they have a whole pool of educated people about that transaction that they can help them navigate that as well on the business side. So building something like that in Alberta is one of the most practical things you could consider doing to actually help the community in Alberta and Western Canada get better about how to develop and how to communicate the innovations that are going on.
It's great. Thanks. Thank you for the ad, Michael. And I think for the question, I think that it's important to just know how do we make those connections, right? Where's the partnership and the expertise? So I think that's a reinforcement of, again, it's all about talent and the right talent for the right part of the development cycle. So I was cautious of time. So Rob, I'm just thinking we're at 4 o'clock. So if I'm just checking in, I think we're drawing to a close. So if there's no more questions, maybe I could turn it over to Niels, just from the perspective of, obviously we're here today. We've got Abbvie representation. What's the best way for people to follow up in terms of bringing opportunities if they want to present to Abbvie, just as a follow-up perhaps? And then Michael, I'll perhaps give you last word in terms of your best advice in terms of beyond setting up expertise, knowing your story. I'll give you the last word. How's that?
Good. I'll keep it short and sweet. Please reach out to us. We're always curious about good science that represents a good strategic fit for us from a therapeutic area vantage point. For you in Alberta and Canada, I would say 2 things. Number 1, Sunita Malhotra is on the call here, and she is serving Canada from a search and evaluation point of view. Please feel free to reach out to her. She will connect you into the organization, to me and others, based on the specific opportunities that you're bringing forward. The other way is very simple, and it always gets to our attention. It's not a dead mailbox. It is partnerships@abbvie.com.
That's great. Thank you. And then Michael, why don't I turn over you for last word in terms of, thanks, Anita. Thanks for showing yourself. It's great. Michael, I'll turn to you.
Well,
so I think it's about best advice. Right?
We've had a lot of good words. I'm not sure any last words can help, but a couple key things I'll say is, number 1, don't expect you're going to do this with one group. You're going to present, and you're going to engage, and you're going to reach out to scores of groups in pharma and the investment community. And what you're going to hear most of the time is no, and just get used to it. You only need one yes, but you're going to collect an awful lot of no's along the way. And so every no you collect, just tick it off as one more place you don't have to go back to in the near future. But it takes tenacity. If you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, the most important thing is.
That's great. Thank you. And so I just want to say thank you to Michael, Niels, fabulous spending this time. And from the questions, I think we've got a really engaged audience. And Sunita put up the email address. So if anyone's looking at the chat, you can see how to get in touch at that partnerships@abbvie.com. And so Rob, I'd like to turn it over to you and just say thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of Boosting Biotech today. Do we lose Rob? I think he's on.
I think Rob has an issue with his screen being frozen. So with that note, I'd like to thank you all. Thank you so much for what it was, just a tremendous discussion. I was enthralled the entire time, and I'm sure that all of our participants were as well. So I want to thank you again, and wish everybody well this afternoon. And we look forward to the next Boosting Biotech mentorship gathering that we can have. And hopefully you guys can join us as well then. Thank you, everybody.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.